Today we will discuss the pivotal Government of India Acts of 1909, 1919 and 1935. These legislative milestones were instrumental in the evolution of India's political landscape during British colonial rule and they significantly contributed to the country's eventual journey towards independence. We will look into the historical context, key provisions, and the significance of each act, highlighting their collective impact on shaping modern India's constitutional framework. First one is Government of India Act of 1909. The Government of India Act of 1909, commonly referred to as the Morley-Minto Reforms, was enacted during the period of raising Indian political consciousness and demands for greater representation in governance. The Act was named after John Morley, the Secretary of State for India, and Lord Minto, the Viceroy of India. This period witnessed a growing uproar among Indians for a more significant role in the legislative processes driven by the aspirations of the Indian National Congress and other political entities. Let's see the key provisions. First one is separate electorates. The introduction of separate electorates was one of the Act's most notable features. This provision allowed Muslims, Sikhs and Christians to elect their own representatives to the legislative councils. This measure was intended to address the concerns of minority communities about adequate representation and protection of their interests within the political framework dominated by the Hindu majority. Second one is increased legislative councils. The Act expanded the size of the legislative councils at both the central and provincial levels. Although the majority of council members continued to be appointed by the British authorities, the number of Indian members was increased. This increment aimed to provide an outward appearance of Indian participation in legislative affairs, though the power dynamics remained skewed in the favor of British. Third one is limited provincial autonomy. The Act granted certain legislative powers to provincial councils. However, the real authority remained with the British appointed governors who had the final say in most matters. This limited autonomy was a step towards decentralization, albeit a modest one. What is its significance? The Government of India Act of 1909 marked a significant step towards political representation for Indians. While it fell short of granting full self-governance, it acknowledged the growing demands for Indian participation in legislative processes. The introduction of separate electorates, though controversial, reflected the complexities of India's socio-religious landscape and laid the groundwork for future constitutional developments. Second one is the Government of India Act 1919. The Government of India Act of 1919, known as the Montagu-Chelmsford Reforms, was enacted in the aftermath of World War I. The global context of the war and the concurrent rise of nationalist movements in India necessitated a response from the British government. Edwin Montagu, the Secretary of State for India, and Lord Chelmsford, the Viceroy of India, played pivotal roles in shaping these reforms. The Act aimed to introduce constitutional changes that would increase Indian participation in governance while maintaining British control. The key provisions of this Act include: the first one is diarchy in provinces. The Act introduced the system of diarchy wherein provincial subjects were divided into two categories: reserved and transferred. The reserved subjects such as law and order, finance and revenue remained under the control of British officials. The transferred subjects, including education, public health and local self-government, were entrusted to Indian ministers. This division aimed to gradually increase Indian responsibility in governance while retaining essential powers with the British. Second provision is the bicameral legislature. The Act established a bicameral legislative structure at both the central and provincial levels. Provincial legislatures were now composed of two houses, while the central legislature also had an upper house, that is the Council of State, and a lower house, that is Legislative Assembly. This bicameral system aimed to provide a more structured and representative legislative process. The third provision is the expanded electorate. The Act expanded the electorate, allowing a larger section of the population to participate in elections. However, the franchise was still limited by property qualifications and other restrictions. The extension of the electorate aimed to create a more inclusive political environment though significant limitations persisted. What is the significance of this act? The Government of India Act of 1919 was a crucial milestone in India's constitutional development. It provided Indians with a greater role in provincial administration and laid the groundwork for further reforms. The introduction of diarchy was a significant experiment in shared governance, reflecting an incremental approach to transferring power. The Act, however, faced criticism for its limitations and the continued dominance of British authority. The next one is the Government of India Act of 1935. The Government of India Act of 1935 was a comprehensive and ambitious piece of legislation that sought to reform India's governance structure and prepare the ground for eventual self-rule. The Act was a response to the growing demands for complete independence and the need for a more robust constitutional framework. It was the longest and most detailed act passed by the British Parliament concerning India, reflecting the complexities and aspirations of the time. Let's see the key provisions of this Act. First one is the federal structure. The Act introduced a federal system of governance delineating separate powers for the central government and the provinces. The central government retained authority over critical areas such as defense, foreign affairs, and communications. This federal structure was aimed at accommodating the diverse and vast nature of India, allowing for more localized governance in the provinces. Second one is bicameral legislature. The central legislature was composed of two houses, the Council of State's upper house and the Assembly lower house. Provincial legislatures were also made bicameral, enhancing the complexity and representativeness of the legislative process. This bicameral system aimed to ensure a more balanced and thorough legislative scrutiny. Next one is provincial autonomy. The Act significantly increased provincial autonomy, allowing provinces more control over their internal affairs. Governors were now required to act on the advice of ministers in most matters, marking a substantial shift towards self-governance. This provision aimed to decentralize power and promote responsible governance at the provincial level. Next one is franchise expansion. The electorate was further expanded, including more Indians in the decision-making process. While still not universal, the expansion aimed to create a more democratic and participatory political environment. Another key provision of this Act is not fully implemented. Despite its comprehensive nature, certain provisions of the Act were never fully implemented due to the outbreak of World War II. The global conflict and the ensuing political developments in India hindered the complete realization of the Act's objectives. Let's see its significance. The Government of India Act of 1935 was a landmark in India's constitutional history. It laid the foundation for the post-independence constitution by emphasizing federalism, provincial autonomy, and democratic principles. The Act's provisions for a federal structure and bicameral legislatures were directly incorporated into the Indian Constitution of 1950. Despite its limitations and challenges of implementation, the Act represented a significant step towards self-governance and the eventual realization of independence. In summary, the Government of India Acts of 1909, 1919 and 1935 represent crucial milestones in India's journey towards self-governance and independence. Each act, with its unique provisions and historical context, contributed to shaping India's political landscape. The Morley-Minto reforms of 1909 initiated political representation for Indians. The Montagu-Chelmsford reforms of 1919 expanded their role in provincial administration, and the Comprehensive Government of India Act of 1935 laid the foundation for India's post-independence constitution. These legislative measures, though imperfect and limited in scope, reflect the evolving nature of India's struggle for self-rule and the complexities of governing a diverse and populous country. They underscore the incremental progress towards democratic governance and the enduring spirit of Indian nationalism that ultimately led to the country's independence in 1947. Thank you. Have a great time.